All right, welcome back again. I
Welcome
hope
back again.
you
I
all
hope
have the opportunity to interact with one another. We are moving into the second panel for the day, which is an interesting one. We are looking at leadership, youth leadership, nourishing that. You all know what it is when it comes to leadership in Africa, a whole lot of negativity and all of that. But today we are going to be focusing probably mostly on the success stories and then how the youth can actually get involved with the whole thing. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the moderator of this amazing panel, which is Shadrach. And then Shadrach can introduce the entire panelists and then we can kick off. So Shadrach, over to you. Shadrach, are you there?
Oh, you unmuted me. Well, I'm back.
All right, cool.
Yeah. So thank you very much, David. I hope everyone, has been enjoying the conference so far. This promises to be very, very exciting. We have some really incredible panelists who are going to share their depth of wisdom and experience in leadership in their own personal journeys and in their work grooming and motivating and helping us as a continent to groom our own young leaders as well. They've met many of some of the very high profile leaders that you may perhaps have met. So as usual, I'll just dive in. As you can see on this panel, we're very blessed and fortunate to have Dr. Jackie Chimhanzi, who is the CEO of the African Leadership Institute. We have Miss Judy, is it Mrs. or Mrs.? Judy, can you help me? Hopefully it's Mrs., right? Am I correct? Can you hear me, Judy?
Yes, I can. It's
I don't know. I think you're muted,
Ms.
Judy.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, it's Ms. Thank you.
Miss, okay. So we have Miss Judy Sikuza, who is the CEO of the Mandela Rhodes Foundation. I'll go a bit more into their background very briefly, and then we have Ms. Caren Wakoli, who is a leadership strategist and is also the founder and executive director of the Emerging Leaders Foundation. We also have on this panel Mr. Faith Abiodun, who is the executive director of Future Africa. Forgive me if I'm not getting I think I'm pretty much doing a bit of a good job with the first names, perhaps not so much with the last names, and I hope the panelists, our incredible panelists, will be very kind to forgive me on that. Okay, so just really diving into their different backgrounds and why they are here to share with us how we can nourish leadership on the African continent. What are some of the narratives that we need to be looking at? How do we even frame our stories in the light of what the West may try to, paint us to be? So Dr. Jackie is a seasoned strategist, with dual decade experience in strategy, both as an academic and a practitioner. She has been recognized in many spaces for her work as the CEO of the African Leadership Institute, which runs the Archbishop Tutu Leadership Partnership Archbishop Tutu Leadership Fellowship in partnership with Oxford University. She's a keen Africa watcher. She's had numerous honors that I could go on and on. Forbes Africa list. She's been on the Forbes Africa list. In 2019, she was listed as one of the 100 most influential African women in the world. She served in many high-profile roles as well, including ones with the Industrial Development Corporation of South Africa and Deloitte Consulting. She joins us today because she brings a very unique blend and a very unique background of the trifecta of academia, strategy, and leadership. And today she'll be sharing more with us as to how, with our generation and in the generations to come, we can build a fort, we can build a whole new stream of leaders, young leaders, who are very passionate about what they do, but then also make sure that it is evidence-driven as well. Welcome to the panel again, Jackie. Next, we have Ms. Judy Sikuza. Judy is a powerhouse in South Africa, and I believe around the globe. Those of you who are probably also watching are looking at our panelists and their backgrounds, and you're seeing that I'm just really scratching the surface with most of them. So Judy is the CEO of the Mandela Rhodes Foundation. She has had an incredible history of leadership background, both personally and also professionally, before becoming the CEO of this incredible high-powered organization. Judy is a non-executive board director of Oxford University Press in South Africa, and also chairs the board's Transformation and Ethics Committee. She's also the board person of Sound Africa, a podcast nonprofit with a mission to produce African stories and ensure that with these stories, we can advance social justice and amplify the voices of everyday people. She's had many, many honors being given to her for her incredible work in talking about issues related to young youth leadership, and also being an actual doer as well. Oftentimes we find that there are a lot of people that just talk about it, but you find throughout our panelists that these are people that have lived it, they've done it, and then they've also studied it for the most part. Judy has published highly in the Daily Maverick, Mail and Guardian, and this all stems from her many academic degrees and qualifications from Columbia University, the Nelson Mandela University in Port Elizabeth, and the Center for Coaching at the University of Cape Town Graduate School of Business. Welcome again to the panel, Judy. Next, we have Caren, who is the founder and executive director of the Emerging Leaders Foundation. Caren made history when she became the very first woman to be elected vice president of the Students' Organization of Nairobi University. And this was after an incredible stream of many firsts. Today, she is a certified leadership coach who harnesses her own multi-experiences in leadership on the personal front and also on the professional front to ensure that the emerging generation of young African leaders like myself, like many of you on this call, are able to fully step into becoming who you want to be, that is achieving your full potential. Caren has received several recognitions for her commitment to youth and women empowerment, democracy, and good governance, and was recently recognized by President Obama in his speech at the Mandela Lecture in South Africa in 2018. She's won many awards to her merit and for her incredible work, notwithstanding including being a Yali East Africa 2014 Fellow, East African Acumen Fellow in 2014 as well, SPAC Kenya Changemaker in 2013, Young Female Achiever in 2006 at the University of Nairobi. And this all just don't stop there. They also come with an incredible academic background, including a master's degree in international studies and a Bachelor of Arts in Communication and Sociology, all from the University of Nairobi. Again, these are all just skimming and trying to highlight why we're so fortunate and blessed to have our incredible panel today. Last is an incredible young man who has also blessed us with his audience today, Faith. Faith is the Executive Director of Future Africa, a public sector leadership organization. And he's also the Collaborative Impact Director at Catalyst 2030, a coalition of the world's leading social enterprises, which are working to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. In a career spanning over a decade at African Leadership Academy, Faith served as a member of the senior executive team overseeing communications, marketing, program recruitment, and partnership. He founded the ALA Model Africa Union and provided a platform that allowed the institution to develop the continent's future public sector leaders. Faith holds academic degrees, including one of a master's degree in public administration from Syracuse University in New York, and those from Nigeria as well. Currently, he is an alumnus of the World Innovation Summit for Education's Executive Education Program, and he also sits on the board of trustees for News Decoder, a global education news service. I'm sure you get a chance to learn about incredible panelists more and more as they share their work, what they do, through the questions and the answers that we will all be discussing today. My name again is Shadrach Frimpong. I am your moderator today. I am a PhD student here at Cambridge. I work with an incredible team of young people at Cocoa 360. We leverage community efforts to improve outcomes in health care and education. And it's such a true honor to be here with you today. So welcome again, everyone, to the panel. And well, let's take it on. Okay, I hope everyone is excited, as I am. Awesome. So I think, before we even jump in, I'm just going to give a quick, maybe 2 to 3 minute breather for our panelists to just go around, share with us something that perhaps they want the audience to know as part of the introduction. We'll do it's our own icebreaker, but really we're going to start with Judy. Just a one-line sentence that you feel like I missed in the intro, in your introduction, but you strongly believe that for the purposes of this panel, the audience needs to know. Please tell us. So Judy goes first.
Take your values seriously, but also don't take yourself too seriously.
Wonderful. Thank you, Judy. Hello, Jackie. Do we have you? Hello, Jackie.
Hello, hi. Yes, I think, okay, so maybe just to reiterate that I'm really, really passionate about young people, and young people are not just the future, they're also the present.
Okay.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jackie. I think next we'll let Caren take us away. Yes.
Inviting me here, and the biggest thing for me is good leadership for ensuring dignity in society. So good leadership is really at the core of what I do, and especially in terms of promoting human dignity in society. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Truly appreciate it. Let's have Faith next. Faith, what's your one
Hi, everyone. My one line is that leadership is a journey, and we must be as invested in the journey as we are in the outcomes.
Okay. Awesome. So there you go. Our panelists just started and heating up the conversation with their various one-liners about what they believe to be their personal ethos about leadership. One thing they believe to be very important about leadership, and they're hoping that it will be able to also drive this conversation as well. So I guess then we just dive straight in. And this question really is for everybody, right? Right across the panel. So everybody can take it at a go. So one thing we do know the world over, is that, you know, there seems to be a general narrative or perhaps a perception of African leadership being largely corrupt. The narrative for decades has been one that's like, oh, African leaders are corrupt. They don't do what they're supposed to do. They don't do this. They don't do that. In your experience, in your work, and in your personal and professional experiences, you know, could you share what are your thoughts on this, right? What are your thoughts on the general perception that, you know, African leaders are corrupt? And how do you think we can maintain a balanced perspective when we're discussing you know, issues around African leaders being corrupt?
Thanks, Shadrach. Can I take that? I think that the current narrative around Africa is that Africa hasn't progressed as much as it should because we have ineffective. Yes. Yes, I'm saying I think the current paradigm around African leadership is that Africa has not progressed as much as it should. We're not where we should be, and that is largely because of ineffective leadership. But I think I'd like to
perceptions? What are your thoughts on the general perception that African leaders are corrupt?
Shadrach, Dr. Jackie was actually going on with the response. I will come in after her.
Okay, can you hear me? Largely because of ineffective.
Yes.
Okay, great. I was saying that there's a current narrative and perceptions around Africa. We are not where we should be as a continent, and I think we all agree to that. And one of the reasons that has been given is just the lack of effective leadership across the board. But what I would like to challenge, I'd like to challenge that narrative and say Africa does have effective leaders, but they happen to be young. And because they're young, they're not taken seriously, and they're not operating at the levels where they should be. They're not sitting at the table. So we could change that narrative by starting to bring in young people to begin to shape the trajectory of Africa going forward. So I think the leaders are there, but we're just not leveraging them. We're not using them as well as we should. I see young people every day in my course of work doing amazing things, disrupting healthcare, disrupting agriculture, disrupting education with technology, with whatever. They're leaders, but we need them to be at the center. We need them to be driving the agenda going forward. I think that that's where there's a mismatch between the supply and the demand of young leaders on the continent. Thank you.
Thank you. Will somebody take us next? Caren, do you want to take it up?
Yes, I can do so. To add on to what Dr. Jackie has said, the continent, just like everywhere else in the world, we have many people in positions of authority, but that is not to say that they actually know what leadership is all about and that they are leaders. They just happen to be in positions of authority. So I think what is critical is building strong institutions instead of focusing on individuals. Because focusing on individuals, today they're there, tomorrow they're gone. But with institutions, that definitely ensures sustainable development. I would say that we focus more on building strong institutions and profiling more young people who are leading change in the political space, in the economic space, in the social cultural space, because they are there and they're doing some really, really amazing things. But then the challenge is maybe they just haven't been profiled sufficiently. That is what I would say. Over to you, Shadrach.
Caren.
Awesome. Thank you, Carol.
Okay, sorry guys, sorry about the internet problem. I think since this particular question is for all the panelists, so we're just going to take it one after the other. So if Caren could go next, then after that, Faith can go, and then the next person can follow suit.
Okay, David, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Oh, okay, perfect. I had actually responded to the question,
okay.
But yeah.
Okay, Faith, I had Faith responded. Okay, you can go for Faith.
I will speak, and then I'll allow Judy to speak next, because I know she's the one who hasn't spoken. Fantastic. Thanks much for the conversation once again. And the question that was posed really was about, the perception of corruption in African leadership. And my thought is that where there is smoke, there is fire, to be honest. And we've got to be willing to confront issues on the face and not simply accept a situation in which we have to manage things as they are. Across the public, private, and non-profit sectors, we can point to huge evidences of corrupt leadership. And in our personal lives as well, we can point to situations in which we have found ourselves in spaces where we were almost constricted into participating in situations that can be called corrupt. And so I think we've got to address, on the one hand, that the current situation of leadership on the continent is far from acceptable. It's far from satisfactory. And there are factors in government, there are factors in the private sector that enable and actually encourage corruption to thrive. And it's up to us to identify those and think in our private lives, how do we navigate those systems? And if we do have the opportunities to step into positions of leadership, to reset those systems such that those who are coming after us do not feel like they're constricted to participate in corruption. But as it is today, we cannot hide the fact that corruption is a factor of African leadership, and it affects every one of us to start with. So I'll hand over to Judy.
Awesome.
So one of the advantages of being last is really to be able to say my colleagues have all captured me, but so I couldn't agree more. And I mean, I think, the key word for me that you used was narrative, right? And so if there's a narrative around corruption in African leaders, we then need to reshape that narrative. And I think a big component of that is really focusing on values-based leadership, right? And I think to Caren's point, it's not just about teaching young people to aspire to positions, but actually to inculcate very deeply what kind of leaders they're going to be when they are sitting at the table. So it's one thing to say, let's push for young people to be sitting at the table, but actually the question is, how are you showing up differently there? What values are you embodying that then mean when there are opportunities to be corrupt, you are able to have courage to speak up against the tide, and have that courage to say, we've got to do things differently. And I think a big part of that courage is actually being willing to lose out on principle, instead of, I think, capitulating to the pressure points of, whether it's Western forces or, older people, if you're a young person in the room. So there's a big component for us in the work we're doing at the Mandela Rhodes Foundation to really try and say, how do we take our young scholars who have demonstrated the potential to be influential in their work, but actually to say it's about creating space of deepening those value sets. And for us, those are embodied in the principles of reconciliation, education, entrepreneurship, and leadership. And the values that underpin that speaks to courage, competence, actually having people who know how to run particular departments or businesses. And then it's also about ethics. And finally, on our end, innovation. A big part of the challenges we face on the continent is that we are not allowing ourselves to try different ways of solving these problems. And so I think we've got to reshape the narrative from one that is about what we are failing to do. And I think I agree with Faith. We've got to tackle head on the issues of corruption while concurrently building that value set of those leaders.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I can't agree less with you. I think right now I will try to go into specifics by asking you specific questions, which I'm going to consider your own background, where you're coming from and all of that. Growing up, I was told that education is the key to success. But one day I was listening to a famous Nigerian comedian, Uke Bakassi, who said that they were deceived, actually, because they were told that education is the key to success and that the youth are the leaders of tomorrow. However, that they've now acquired education, and we realize that the padlock has been changed. So the key we have can no longer open that success door. So Jackie, I could go to you with this. Your background is unique in that you have a stronger interplay of academia, strategy, and leadership. Could you share how you believe evidence leadership and strategy can actually help us to shape the narrative of leadership on the continent?
Oh gosh, I hope my sons didn't hear you saying that education doesn't matter. You're going to make my job much harder. Yes, education matters. It's everything. Yeah, and your specific question around strategy, if you can just repeat that.
Yeah, my question is if you could share how you believe that evidence, leadership, and strategy can help us shape the narrative around leadership on the continent.
No, absolutely. I mean, strategy is very important, because I think we now need leaders who plan based in the reality of what is happening around them. You know what I mean? We no longer need leaders who are out of touch with the reality of what's happening on the ground. So evidence-based strategy, or whatever you do, needs to be evidence-based. And I think this is where young people can come in, because these are young entrepreneurs who are out there. They're on the coalface, right? They're doing deals. They understand the issues of trying to raise money. They understand the issues of the agriculture sector, of education, of healthcare. You know what I mean? So I think there's a role for governments to bring these young people, because they're the ones who understand the reality on the ground. Because I think sometimes the policies that we see, they kind of just formulated in thin air. They don't really have any grounding in reality, you know? So I think there's a real key role for young people who are innovators, who are working at the forefront of change, to bring them into governments to be able to kind of inform how policy should be based on their experiences. So I think strategy, evidence-based leadership, I think they're very important. Thank you.
Awesome. I think I agree with you on the evidence-based part of things. But what happens, I think this would lead to the next question, which I would like to direct to Judy. Sometimes a whole lot of people, maybe people in diaspora, you've kind of seen the world, you've traveled, and then you come back, you want to make some changes. And people could say, hey man, this is not London, this is not US, this is not this, and all of that. You don't think because you've gotten a PhD from Cambridge, you want to tell us how to do things and all of that. We've not seen the things you've done. So that makes one to start thinking, if you go out and you acquire all of this knowledge, you see how things are being done out there, and you want to come back home to replicate all of this, how then do you start replicating them? So on that basis, Judy, I would like to ask, I'm sure you get a whole lot of questions like this, given that you work with the Mandela Rhodes scholars. But why do you think it is important we make international efforts, intentional efforts to cultivate leadership values in African youth?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about, I think, unpacking how we understand the role of leaders in general, right? Historically, and I mean, the way I grew up, old people were leaders and they were in positions, and we just had to listen to everything they said, right? But I think what energizes me with this young generation that I'm part of and that I work with at the Mandela Rhodes Foundation is you know, they have this, you know, what we'd call in South Africa, chutzpah. It's an internal courage, an internal almost disregard actually for old systems and structures. And I think a big part of that is because they're really committed to seeing a world that can be more equitable and more just. You know, there's almost a fundamental belief that the way in which these systems and structures that we've created are not sustainable. And so I think you have to reshape your thinking about leadership. It's not about this one person who has all the answers and is going to come down from, you know, the Ivy Tower and tell people how to run things. I think for me, it's actually starting to see yourself as a leader as influencer, leader as facilitator, leader as catalyst, the person who can help create, you know, the vision and help people see where you're going, but actually really empower the people you work with to be the one to kind of drive, you know, the change on the ground. So I would be very wary if those of us who do go out and get international experience come back and think we've got the solutions. I think the advantage of that is that it shows you other contexts and how people have navigated through various challenges, but you've got to be contextual. You've got to say, okay, well, what is our world? What is our reality? And how do we make sure that, and I think as Jackie alluded to, how do we intervene to the reality? Because I think I've seen a lot of very frustrated conversations happening, perhaps in, you know, in tables with government, where our African leaders might want the ultimate solution, the best case scenario, but the problem is you've got a population that doesn't have the skills. And so what is the middle way that says, well, how do we deal with, for example, youth who are not in education, employment, and training? Because in this African context, for example, that's about 50% of those people. And so they can't all go to university, right? So we've got to figure out other alternative forms for these young people to be able to express themselves, because ultimately, you know, they are both, as Jackie says, the current hope for us and the future. So I think the values-based component, the second part of your question about the values-based, it's the core for me. You know, your values drive your decision-making. And I think institutionally people have misunderstood that. Values are there to drive your decision-making. So if you say we value integrity, then how are you making sure in every decision you are applying integrity? If you say you value excellence, that means in everything you do, you want to make sure that the product is excellent, that you deliver on time, that if you committed to your colleague that you're presenting the report on Monday, that the report comes on Monday. Like, you know, it's the basic things that we seem to be missing around values, which is, if we say we are committed to these values, then we've got to apply them in the everyday decisions that we make. I'll leave it there for now.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Judy, for that amazing contribution. Just to remind our audience that you can continue to use the question and answer section of the interface to post your question, which we are going to take once I stop interacting with the panelists. Please use the Q&A, not the chat box, because I wouldn't have time to kind of navigate between both of them, so we save some time. So I think following on what Judy has said, I want to move over to Caren. Usually there is this kind of fear within people when you are the first person to do something. There is no one you are looking up to. There is no role model. There is no one you can say, okay, hey, how did you do this? You're just the first person of all of this. So when it comes to looking at you being first to do something, and then you want to be a leader, you want to go back home to change the narrative, you want to lead your people. I'll give you an example. Back in the last general election that we had in Nigeria, it happened that there's this young fella from the US who came back home and wanted to say his campaign promises a whole lot of things he wanted to do. He's into tech and all of that. But I'm not sure he got up to 50 votes from the entire country at the general election. So that was his first, and because it was his first, there was nothing to speak for him that, okay, this person is able to do this. So Caren, your own path as a leader has been one of many firsts, right? So how do you think we can intentionally groom young Africans to face this leadership from the first point of view? Okay, I think, I don't know if we lost Caren.
David, sorry, I lost you when you were asking me the last part of the question about how can we groom young leaders?
Yes, how can we intentionally groom young Africans to become the leaders that the continent actually needs?
Okay. Thank you so much, David, for that question. So let me first begin by just commenting on something you talked about while starting this second set of questions, which was about education. Oh my goodness, David, education is so key. And you know what? If education wasn't as important, you wouldn't be at the University of Cambridge and many of the participants wouldn't be there. So education is so key. And for my own life and in my own personal journey and story, let me tell you something. Education is, in a big way, education has played a key role in getting me to where I am at right now. And even in having the value system I have, in having the vision I have, oh my goodness, it is education. And I remember when I was growing up, my parents kept telling me, Caren, when you get a chance to go to school, give it your all, because education is what will get you and the rest of us, your family, out of poverty. And let me tell you something, education has played a key role in changing that. And I discovered that education at school is important, but education in life in general, especially education out of the classroom setup, is most important, because that is where we get groomed as leaders. I had opportunities to be mentored and to be guided as a leader. I had, and I still have them, mentors and coaches who have played such a key role in my life in terms of guiding me in my career pursuits, in my personal life, in running Emerging Leaders Foundation, in mentoring and coaching and nurturing young leaders. That particular set of an ecosystem has played a key role in just shaping who I am today in a big way. You talked about fear of being a pioneer, a trailblazer, or a first in doing something or achieving something. Something interesting I've discovered is that there's something really powerful. It's also painful, yet very.
Okay, I think we've lost Caren. Okay.
But there's something powerful about paying the price. When you are amongst the first people to do something, you definitely then get to pay the price to then be able to achieve success or to achieve impact in something. And the art of paying that price is never easy. But if you are convicted and you have that conviction and you know that this is purposeful for me, then you would be ready to pay the price. And in the course of nurturing ethical and values-based young leaders at Emerging Leaders Foundation and in the different spaces I find myself in, I find that the place of mentorship is really, really, really important, where young leaders get paired up with people who have gone before them in different sectors. For those who want to be politicians, we pair them up with ethical politicians to then journey with them. Those who want to start businesses, the same thing. Those who want to be in civil society and activism, again, we do that. So one of the biggest tools and weapons when it comes to nurturing and grooming young African leaders is mentorship. I cannot gainsay the place of mentorship. So mentorship is one, really, really key. Something else that I find really beautiful and nice in terms of nurturing young leadership is the place of storytelling. There's power in stories. I listened to some of the panel discussions earlier on, and it's just powerful how we then get to tell our stories, because then our stories shape who we are and who we become. So just building up onto what other speakers have said, being able to nurture young people to own their stories and to begin to change the narrative around youth leadership plays a key role in terms of positioning young people to influence change in different sectors of society. So storytelling is also important. So I will end it there. Over to you, David.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think I quite agree with you on that. Of course, my opening statement, I'm not trying to underplay the value or the place of education in what we are doing, but there are a whole lot of young people who hear a whole lot of things out there. People need to see people that is going to motivate them. My sister, I was having a conversation with her, and I told her, what do you want to do when you finish studies? Do you want to be a lecturer? Do you want to be a banker or whatever? He told me that he don't want to be a lecturer. And I said, why? He said, because he's looked at the lecturers that are teaching her. She doesn't think that they are good enough to be her role model. Okay, so people look at things that are happening around them and then use that. You can, no matter what we know today, you can overrule that people are going to take misconceptions of certain things the way they are not going forward. So if you look around Africa have a very youthful population, right? But when we look at political leaderships, be it president, governor, senate, house of reps, whatever it is in the African continent, it looks like the youth are not well represented. But during election, this huge population of youth are the people who still vote to place those people we are saying that they are corrupt, they are elderly, they are this, into power. So Faith, I want to shift a bit to you. What do you think is the reason why, despite the fact that we've got this huge youthful population in Africa, we still struggle to see youth in position of political powers? And what can we do to actually remedy that situation?
Thanks, David. There's a lot that needs to go into the political conversation before we can begin to see the kind of participation and representation that we want to see for youth. Firstly, we need to look at the structures of politics. The structures in politics today do not encourage young people to enter, and the structures do not sustain young people when they enter into politics. If you look at party institutions across the continent, you could pick Nigeria, you can pick Ghana, you can pick whatever country you want to look at. The party infrastructure itself is not welcoming to the average young person who's trying to build themselves up to be a person of impact. When you enter, even if you have one or two, if you're sitting on one or two conversations with the existing party political operatives, you want to leave the room because you feel you're not welcome. And I have been in rooms with politicians, and the conversations are not forward-looking. They're not direct. It's all about the system. They talk about the system. They talk about how to win elections, and so there's a lot in the party systems that do not encourage people to enter. You don't even feel welcome. You don't feel as though the conversations are the kinds of conversations that light you up. There is that. The one we don't talk about a lot is money. It is impossible to afford elections in Africa. Plain and simple, impossible. It's extremely expensive for young people to fund their own way into elections. You cannot fund your own way. You need people to fund you. And the question is, what are you trading off to get someone to fund your path into politics? What are you trading off? So very many people think about, allying themselves with certain individuals who are already in government. And that means that you position yourself as a chief of staff somewhere, a private assistant somewhere, an executive assistant somewhere, and you're carrying the bags, you're accompanying them to conversations, you're going to conferences, you're doing all of the things in the hopes that maybe one day you've served your apprenticeship and you get the chance to graduate on your own. And so I don't see many young people, going into electoral politics because they cannot afford it. And secondly, they don't have the infrastructure. You made the example of a gentleman who moved back from the US into Nigeria to run for politics. When you break down the structure of the political environment in Nigeria, there's 774 local governments. How many of those local governments can he travel to physically to organize a meet and greet that will bring 50 people to attend? what's going to get him across the country? You know, who's going to fund his travels? Who's going to fund the event organizing? Who's going to, you know, pay money to people to show up? Who's going to pay for the t-shirts, the face caps, the bags of rice, the everything that you have to do in order to be seen as welcome, as acceptable? You know, so the hoops that a young person has to jump, they don't exist. Therefore, we need to go back to the structures that enable politics to happen. It's the party political structure. So we want to encourage young people to join a political party, no matter how much you dislike the ethics of that party. You're not going to jump in from the top and then become an acceptable candidate. As long as we've adopted democracy as our system of governance, and we don't see an alternative that delivers the same, you know, benefits of democracy while taking away its deficiencies, there is no credible alternative today. In our democratic system, you've got to go through a political party, because independent candidacy by itself is not yet an option in many parts of the continent. And where it is, you come back to the question of money and name recognition. And so since you cannot build your own political party and cover all the grounds in the country and become represented, accepted at that level, you've got to go through the systems that exist. And you have to begin to fight through those systems. And so I used to believe, and I still strongly do, the young people must simply get in. However they get in, you must enter in at the grassroots, which is the party political system. Join the party and be active in your local ward, in your local government, go to the meetings. You will then encounter the frustrations once you are in that party, which is why you need critical mass. You've got to bring in a few other friends like you to say, look, we're going to have to get involved, because things will not change by themselves over time. Things will not change because we simply showed up. But the way I want to anchor this is that no matter how much we dislike the politics of the day, and no matter how much we complain and we criticize, when democratic transitions happen, when one leader gives way for the other, there will be no vacuum. Someone will always step in. And if you are not in the conversation at all, you will not be the person who steps in. So you've got to be in the conversation. You've got to make yourself an option. There will be no vacuum in government. And how do you make yourself accessible? When the space opens, why will they look to you? So you've got to be in the room. And so everyone who's listening, who's thinking, oh my gosh, politics really sucks, we can't change it, we hate it, I'm pleading with you to step in the room. Just make yourself an option. You might not win elections today or tomorrow or next year, but let's begin to step into the room. Eventually, our time will come.
I think that is a powerful summary. Be in the room. Like, if there is nothing I'm taking away from this panelists, I'm taking that out. So place and position myself in that room where those conversations are taking place. So thank you very much for that, Faith. So I'm going to kind of take this question, same question I've directed to Faith, but now, Jackie, you have, again, going back to my first question to you, because of your strong interplay between academia, strategy, and leadership of a thing, I wanted to answer the same question that Faith had just addressed, but specifically looking at the youthful population of women. Because we are generally talking about the youth, but if we break it down further into what happens with women, it's even more appalling than it is with youth.
Mm. Yeah, no, I heard what Faith said, and I do agree. But if you look at how young people can play a role in shaping their countries in terms of governance and going forward, there are two main types of roles, right? One is an elected role and one is an appointed role. So I think Faith spoke to the elected role, and I think it's the much harder one because you have to go out, you have to campaign, you have to find the money, but also there's age of participation. And I think Nigeria has done well with the Not Too Young to Run movement, which has lowered the age of participation. But even when the age of participation is lowered, the young people still face the challenges Faith raised in terms of funding for their campaigns. But there's also appointed positions. And I think we just need more progressive governments to appoint more young people. You look at Rwanda, for example, President Kagame has mainstreamed youth. So it's normal just to see young people in positions of power. It's normal to see young people as ambassadors of Rwanda in various countries. It's normal to see them as ministers. It's normal to see them as CEOs of state-owned enterprises, to see them sitting on boards of SOEs. So I think we need kind of a combination of both, because the elected route is much more difficult, not just for young people. It's just difficult to get into power, period. In the US, some presidents have campaigned 3-4 times before they finally got in. So I think for now, I'd rather deal with the appointed positions and appeal to our current heads of states to say, can you appoint more young people? Because you need a diversity of views around the table. You need men, you need women, you need young people. So I think typically we think of gender diversity, but we don't necessarily think of age diversity. So we always talk about, gender quotas, bring more women in, but we rarely talk about age. And I think age is important, particularly because Africa has got a very unique demographic profile. So on the continent that is the youngest in the world, it's actually quite shameful that we don't see more young people representing us in positions of power. So I would say more women and more young people. We need those two for complete diversity.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that amazing contribution. And yeah, I believe with you. Again, that was actually going to take me into my next question, which I would like to direct to Judy. We are talking about SDG and the deadline of 2030, right? And there are a whole lot of things, from poverty, education, what have you, partnership that needs to happen and all of that. So trying to head each of these goals is actually a way of showing leadership on what the youth who have in the continent can actually do. So my question to you is, could you share with us what you think in your own thinking, what could be the contributions you believe African youths can make towards the realization of the SDG 2030?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just to reiterate, I so agree with my colleagues about the points they've just raised, particularly because by 2030, right, 75% of our continent is going to be under the age of 35, right? So that should be a very obvious thing, that we should be investing our efforts in young people, helping them to feel capable to step into these conversations. Let me give you some examples. We've got some Mandela Rhodes scholars, Noella Moshi, for example. She's from Tanzania, and her contribution to your question around SDGs, for example, she's working in the social innovation education space. She's an executive director of Future Fund for Education, and what they do is they work as catalysts for African education entrepreneurs. They invest in financial and intellectual capital in talented people who are leading early to mid-stage education ventures. And so it's actually kind of picking up these stories of these young people who are actually trying to solve some of the critical questions that we are dealing with. I also think of Nsaku Mikiba, who's a South African Mandela Rhodes Scholar. He is the co-founder and CEO of Jonga Security Technology Company. And what he's trying to solve here is providing affordable community-based alarm systems for low-income communities. And they've really done this really interesting process of developing a system that connects people to their community and local police in real time during emergencies. And then I think lastly, in the kind of governance space and the point around elected officials, one of our scholars from 2011, Dr. Emmanuel Nibishaka, he is actually now the Deputy CEO of the Rwanda Governance Board, which is an independent public institution that's really mandated to promote principles of good governance across public and private sectors. And so we have young people who are really doing active work to contribute towards, SDGs and really kind of take their innovation and their talent and the values into these spaces. So I feel very hopeful, and I think a big piece for us is to say, how do we just get more resources to these young people who are actually doing this incredible work out there? And I think the more we can actually focus on those narratives, we'll start to also see that actually there's a lot that is being done on the continent that's transforming for the better.
Thank you so much, Judy. I think the next question, I would like to direct that question to Caren. And before I ask the question, just to share with you my own personal experience, because I believe strongly that no matter what, that you're seeing someone you can look up to, a role model, someone who has gone through a particular journey to achieve a set objective, it kind of motivates you to believe that, okay, this, you can actually do it. Back in Nigeria during my undergraduate, I have kind of thought of doing a postgrad outside the country, right? But then sometimes I wonder how difficult that could be. But there was something that inspired me. There was a guy who graduated from electrical engineering in my school. I get to know about him, and after he's finished his service, I learned that he was at Cambridge. So hearing that that guy was able to study in the same university as me in Nigeria and be able to get into Cambridge made me to kind of eradicate that fear that I might not be able to go to Cambridge if I aim for it. And today I started working towards that, and today I'm proud to say that I'm doing my PhD here. Whether or not that had an effect on what happened, how I prepared myself, is a different story. But I'm very sure that it was part of the things that made me to start thinking of moving beyond where I am today. So on that, based on that, Jackie and Judy had shared a typical example of success stories of leadership in youth elsewhere. So I would like to use the rest of the opportunity to give, maybe after you, then Faith can come in actually. If you could share with us some powerful stories, if there is anyone you know about youth leadership that you think you have seen or experienced, so that hopefully our audience could be motivated, those of us who are trying to look into leadership, can know that, yeah, there are people out there who are already doing it, and so they can also do it themselves.
Thank you, David, for that question. So actually, in responding to your question, I think I will draw a bit into the question you had asked previously about political engagement. And I would like to use myself as an example. So I have just shared about my upbringing, which was a bit difficult, and I kept thinking, will I really ever make it? Will my dreams ever come to pass? Will I ever go to school and you know, all that? And then I got the chance and went through education. But by then I had discovered the power of leadership. And like John Maxwell puts it, everything rises and falls on leadership. So I vowed at an early age to then study leadership, understand leadership, and take up leadership opportunities and roles to then just, yes, make mistakes, but then also learn by leading and by serving individuals. And so I got into various leadership positions. And at some point I discovered, especially after clearing my undergraduate education, I discovered that what I had been doing the 4 years in student politics was actually politics. So I got into a political party. I served the party for 1 year, of course, in the hopes that I was going to run for office the following year to become a member of parliament. And I thought that university politics had prepared me sufficiently and exposed me to then understand the nitty-gritties and the workings of politics. 2007 came and I declared I was going to run to be MP, and that's when problems began. That's when I discovered, oh my goodness, national politics is very different from student politics. I thought I had talked to women who had tried it. I had talked to men who had tried it. I had spoken to a few young people and listened to their stories, but oh man, what I saw, what I heard, what I faced, I had not been sufficiently prepared for it. Suffice it to say that, of course, I didn't progress with the running. I didn't even get to the nomination stage. I dropped off the rest, and I felt really, really shattered. I'm a trained journalist, so I then decided to just let go everything and go back into media. So I continued working in the media space. But let me tell you something, the passion to ensure youth inclusivity, youth inclusion, and effective youth participation in policy processes, in political processes across the nation and in the region did not end. In fact, I think a seed was planted with the supposed death of my political ambitions, a seed had been sown within. And so I started engaging within the political processes, not just in Kenya, but on the continent, with the African Union, with the African governance architecture, and went on, and took part in various political processes, from being an elections observer to being someone, and of course, running an institution that then trains young people who want to run for office. Because I discovered that had I been properly nurtured and trained and mentored, maybe the story would be different. And I met many young men and women whose stories were not any different. Some of the stories were worse off than mine. And we discovered, you know what, young people need to be mentored. They need to be given opportunities. Their eyes need to be open to understand, how do you run for office? How do you raise resources? I didn't have money, but I had been elected an official, a regional official in something, and I thought that was sufficient. Little did I know I needed money. So how do you raise resources? How do you create a track record within your community for people to elect you? How do you brand yourself? And, you know, all that stuff. So right now, part of the work I do is to, like right now, we're running a program called The Good Politician, which is basically about nurturing young women and men who want to run for office next year to understand how to navigate the whole process, from ethical leadership and being courageous enough to make proper decisions in the political space, to raising resources, to communicating and branding, and, you know, all that stuff. The other bit that is also really, really important is about advocating for stronger institutions that would then manage our elections better. Because a lot of young people are giving up on politics and on voting, or even getting involved in the political space, because they feel like my vote doesn't count, that whoever is counting the votes counts more. So how do we then close that up and say, you know what, let's have institutions that are credible enough to then give young people the hope that, you know what, you can participate in the elections, and yes, your vote does count. So, and also just being able to start the organization and go through failure after failure, but also go through progress after progress, and seeing young people rising up and believing in themselves and believing in their ability to create change in different sectors of society has given me hope that, you know what young people need is not handouts. They just need opportunities, and somebody who believes in them, somebody who calls out the leader in them and tells them, you know what, you can do this. I have other stories of young women and men who are really doing some really amazing stuff. There's a young woman called Grace Mageka, who came into our program. She was a student leader, but then she had a few things working against her. One of it, and this literally used to put her down, she had a strong mother tongue interference. And so whenever she would speak, people would laugh at her. But then she came and grew in leadership and got nurtured and mentored. And she discovered, you know what, it's not how I speak that matters. It is what I say that matters. It is how I live my life and what I do that matters. And she said, you know what, my mother tongue interference here, there, it doesn't matter. And the moment she let go that perception and believed in herself and had the confidence, she actually then started engaging in policy issues and influencing and shaping policy, not just in Kenya or East Africa, but at the African Union level. And right now she's influencing policy in Rome, but then continentally in a continental-wide body, actually a global body, not continental. There's a young man called Ahmed. Ahmed is in a city in Mombasa, in Kenya, called Mombasa, where he uses sports to then be able to nurture young women and men in leadership. Ahmed didn't go past secondary school education. And then I just discovered, you know what, education, yeah, like we said, education is important, but then the conviction is even much, much more important. So in summing that up, it's just to say that when young people get to find out their why, whether the why is in government, in politics, in public service, in private sector, in media, in academia, the moment they find their why and pursue it, or they make such a huge difference, they make such a huge, and they get to live meaningful lives. So I think for young people, it's a matter of discovering the why, paying the price to then be able to pursue that, and being in constant growth, where you're learning constantly about yourself, about leadership, about emerging trends and all that, to then just make sure that your growth is sustainable and that the change you're leading is also sustainable. Over to you, David.
Thank you very much. I think you gave me more than what I asked. I wanted Faith to kind of weigh in, but because I also want to take the conversation to the audience, I'm going to make do with all the amazing things that you pointed out, because you gave me more than what I've asked. Okay, so I would like to engage the audience looking at the questions that we've got, a couple of questions, because we've got just 10 minutes to wrap up the panel. So the first question is specifically directed to Jackie, and this person has said, how do we find evidence-based strategies in locations with relatively weaker statistical and academic institutions?
It's a very good question, and what I would recommend is sometimes knowledge and evidence resides in people. So I appreciate that Africa may not have strong institutions where we can have robust studies that provide supporting evidence, but maybe we just need to work with the young people who have the evidence from working every day on the ground as entrepreneurs. Every day they know the challenges of trying to raise capital. They know the challenges of trying to get funding from a bank. That is evidence, So sometimes evidence comes in a different package. So evidence doesn't mean longitudinal studies over 15 years from Cambridge or wherever, So I think in Africa, we just have to make do with the knowledge that we have, which resides in our young people.
Awesome.
Thank you. And also a lot of them are experts in their own rights. So like I said, sometimes we look, because of our culture, patriarchal culture, which looks down on women, it looks down on young people. You speak when you're spoken to, you are young, so you don't really know anything. So I think our current leadership also needs to open up to realize that these young people bring a lot of knowledge and evidence and intelligence that they've also accumulated in their work experiences. So we need to value that experience as much as we would if it came from a formal institution. Thank you.
Completely. I think I agree with you. Thank you. I think you've done more than justice to that question. So we move to the next question. This person have asked, what values should a leader have? Are they supposed to be economic values or moral values? Is there a difference between the values that a leader is possessing and the virtue of a leader? Faith, can you take a go on this?
Absolutely. I mean, in society, we look to leaders to do much more than we can do ourselves. We look to leaders to embody the highest aspirations that we can come up with. And so the expectation of those who rise to leadership is that they've got to be able to embody the values, some of the values that Judy was talking about earlier: integrity, excellence, humility, that you bring people into conversations rather than dominate them, right? So we're looking to leaders to be just people of good character. So firstly, moral values are the most important, no matter what society, no matter what position a person takes on. You want to see, is this a good person? Can I project my individual aspirations onto them and believe that they can handle that? There is the first. Economic values, not so much. These things can be learned. Not so much on the job, but they can be learned. And again, this is where we've got to begin to look beyond the individual and look at the systems that enable success for that individual, right? When you look to an individual, so much we talk about like the Rwanda story. Oh, Paul Kagame is such a great man. No, talk about the Rwandan government, not about Paul Kagame. He doesn't do every single thing in the country. He's not the one who builds the airports. He's not the one who teaches in the schools. He's not the one who teaches, community leaders how to solve their own challenges. So I'm always for the institutions, the structures that enable success. And equally, when a leader fails, we've got to look to the systems that encourage that failure, that give them a pass. We've got to look into the legislature that doesn't hold the executive to account. We've got to look to the judiciary that fails to enforce the laws that they're supposed to enforce in the land. So the structures really matter the most. Does an environment encourage leaders to get away, or does the environment force them to live up to their values? Many of us study the US system because it's the most prominent and we can see it on the news every single day. Can you imagine what the United States would look like today if there were no laws in place over the last 4.5 years? If the leader was allowed to just rule by gut, we wouldn't have a United States, perhaps, right? So what we're looking at there is the existence, and those forces were pushed to the limits. The system, the laws of the land, the individuals, and you can see if you continue to observe democracy in the United States, you will still see that many people have completely shifted their values within the party of the last president. They're unable to even find a center any longer, because in 4 years, an entire system was shifted and turned on its head. In an African country, there would have been no chance whatsoever for democracy to remain under that kind of pressure. And so I'm all for systems, and I'm all for our focus, not just on the individual. We've got to be building structures behind people. As they move forward, let's build the structures behind them a little bit forward and build those structures. Otherwise, society will collapse 100%.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with you. Having a strong institution is far, far better than talking about strong individuals, because for sure, those individuals are going to leave. So what remains of the institution, what remains of the system going forward is what matters. Okay, so the next question was specifically directed to Judy, and this person is asking a question around crown princess effects of a thing. So how do you approach the challenge of not creating a group or network of people who develop the entitled crown princess or prince effect?
I like the terminology, crowned princess. Yeah. Oh, this is a big one. This is a big one, because I think a lot of, most of us here on this panel are working with kind of what we would say is the creme de la creme, right? And the people that we believe, if we invest in you, the return on social impact will be greater than if we put our investments elsewhere. I think, it goes back again to humility. And trying to instill that principle in our young leaders to say, yes, you have the talent. Yes, you have the vision. Yes, we can see that you're someone who'll be very influential, but the humility to actually know and understand that you are only one tiny, very insignificant speck in a very big system, right? So that humility to be grounded and to continue to remember, and it's hard because you're being featured, right? Mail and Guardian top 200, Forbes top 500, top because that's the system and structure we've created and how we elevate young people who want to make change. And so it requires consistent inner work, right? One of my favorite quotes is by a leader that Otto Sharma had worked with. And he says, the quality of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener. Right. And so that's a very powerful thing for me that always keeps me grounded in my own leadership journey, is to say, how do I always remember that this is not about me? I am a conduit. I am a channel to a manifestation of, impact and values. And the minute, and I think that's part of the problem, when you see in Africa the corruption and the holding on to power, it's because people have now made this about them. They've made leadership and power about them. And I think we have to inculcate a sense of returning to humility. And also, as Brene Brown talks to, the kind of embracing of vulnerability, right? So if I can embrace my vulnerability as a leader and to say, I'm not going to be perfect all the time. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm not going to make decisions that are ideal, but that to the best of my ability with my team, we will always pursue the values. And so I think part of what makes you humble is also knowing that you are not perfect. And how do we instill those qualities as well, instead of just the kind of evangelic kind of African leadership? You are powerful, you're amazing, you're inspiring, you're going to bring change, you know? And what about, you are also a human being, you have vulnerabilities, you have imperfections, you have shadows, you have prejudice. And how do we work to heal those components? Because when you see some of the issues that are manifesting in our leaders, it is the shadow work that they did not do. It is the vulnerabilities that they did not adhere to and face in themselves. And so we've got to build integrated people who show up with humility, because we understand that we contain both the strengths of the power and the impact that we're going to make, and also the grounded reality. I mean, I'm a mom of a 2-year-old, and I can assure you, I can be boss lady, CEO, signing the deals out there. I have this child's nappies and poop that I must wipe, and I must sit there at night at 3 a.m. and she's crying and I want to sleep, and that stuff just kind of grounds you. So it's also like, look at the people around you, look at your environment, look at your partner, your family, your friends. They're human beings, they're normal, they've got strengths and weaknesses. And I think as leaders, we've got to make sure with the young people we're building, that humility really gets instilled. It's very crucial.
Thank you so much, Judy. I would have loved to continue this conversation, but we're already running out of time. So I'm going to give each and every one of you the opportunity to wrap up, a final word for our audience. But while you are doing that, I would like you to answer the question, what are your hopes for the future of African leadership? What you're trying to do. So can we start with Caren?
Hope for the future of African leadership is that we will get to a time, and I hope that time it's actually progressive. We're getting to that time when we will have ethical leadership. Like, being a leader of integrity will be the norm and not the exception. And that Africans will be people who are living in dignity, but not people whose human rights are abused left, right, and center, and injustices and all that. And my parting shot is that leadership is a sacred calling, and each and every one of us is a leader. So each and every one of us has that calling upon their lives. Find out what your unique niche is and what your assignment in this life is, and go all out and give your energy, your expertise, your passion, your creativity, everything you got to it, and seek to inspire through that calling before you expire. Because time comes when we all go to meet our maker, and what counts and what matters is how we lived this life and how we were able to make our little impact, or what life we were able to touch. So find your why, find that one thing, find your assignment, and just go all out and be the best you can be in life. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So can we move to Jackie?
Yes, I dream of an Africa that actually leverages its demographic dividend. I think we talk about it, but we don't do it. So it's a nice strapline, Africa's demographic dividend, young people. But what are we doing with them? We parade them, the statistics, Africa's the youngest, but they're not there to be paraded. They're there to make a contribution. They're there to be leveraged. We need to harness their energy, their creativity, new ideas, So I dream of an Africa that opens up spaces to allow young people to fully participate, particularly in governance. Thank you.
Awesome. So can we get back to Judy again?
My hopes for African leadership going forward is that we have leaders who are wholehearted, and this speaks to a balance between vision and courage and innovation and competence, and at the same time a grounded connection to the realities of the everyday people, and that we can do our bit in our small corners, in our big corners, in our big rooms, to really see Mandela's dream of a truly transformed, prosperous African continent.
Awesome. And last but not the least, can we hear from Faith?
Yes. Firstly, I'd like to thank the organizers of this panel for ensuring that there are more women than men on the panel. This is the first time I have ever been on a panel, and I have been outnumbered, and I'm so privileged to have been outnumbered today, and I'm super grateful for that. So thanks everyone for making sure that that's what this panel looked like, and salute to all the speakers, my colleagues who have been absolutely brilliant. I'd like to say to everyone that the change that we're looking forward to seeing will not come over time. Change does not happen over time. Change only happens when committed people make deliberate actions. We've got to be absolutely deliberate about the change that we want to see in society. And if we think about leadership, whether it's in the public or in the private sectors, we've got to think about how we will get involved, right? And getting involved means that we have to be willing to educate ourselves about the challenging space in which we're trying to work. You cannot change what you do not understand. And so you're going to have to begin to understand how public sector leadership operates. You're going to have to understand whether that's elected, whether that's appointed. If you're going to make a difference, you're going to have to prepare yourself to make a difference. There's a lot of agitation by young people to be represented. We want more young voices, but it's more important, I believe, for us to be prepared. Preparation beats agitation any day of the week. Preparation will always be the most important thing. If and when you get that appointment, will you be prepared to be better than the systems that you've criticized, than the individuals whom you've criticized? So for every young person out there, you've got to be willing to get in the ring, make your voice heard, do the work, influence one person if that's all you get a chance to do. No matter how much you agitate, it's better to prepare ahead of the day when it's your turn. That's my hope for African leadership.
Thank you.